wandering through many lives, seeking but not finding the builder of this house, repeatedly experiencing the suffering of birth. House builder, you have been seen. You will build no house again. All your rafters are broken. Your ridgepole is demolished too. The mind has gone to the unconditioned and reached the end of every kind of craving. So those of you who were here at the start of the day heard those words from the Dhammapada that, well, Ketaraja recited those words. They're the words that are said to have been uttered by the Buddha, the first words after his enlightenment, to himself, I guess, or to the cosmos, to the whole universe, to all beings. These are the words that he is said to have uttered. And it's these words that I want to sort of dwell on in this talk and maybe unpack a little bit. It's very, very good to be here, by the way. Really lovely to be here in Cambridge on Buddha Day and be amongst you and this beautiful shrine that has been created. So yes, thank you. Thank you for coming, and thank you for inviting me to celebrate with you. The first thing that I want to talk about, though, looking at these words, wandering through many lives, seeking but not finding the builder of this house, repeatedly experiencing the suffering of birth, you immediately get this sense that the Buddha to be, before his enlightenment, was driven by an existential quest. It's an existential matter that he was concerned with. All the going forth, the striving, the commitment to gain enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, to not move until flesh had withered and blood had dried up. It wasn't driven by anything less than a quest to get to the heart of the meaning of life. What is it to be human, particularly in the face of mortality? What is it to be alive in the face of knowing that we're going to die? It's that existential questioning and questing that I want to start off with, because I think it's probably what's brought us all here to the Dharma at some point. And I think it's so easy to lose sight of and forget. Partly I'm talking to myself. I think particularly, I don't know, after ordination, it's very easy to be involved in goodly things like giving talks and teaching the Dharma. And in Triratna, if you take any responsibility in Triratna, you will find yourself in meetings talking about the running of things and how do we create and hold together this international community, this Sangha that spans so many countries and cultures, and meetings are one way that we kind of do that. But in amongst it all, I find myself in a lot of meetings, I have to, I must confess, I sometimes forget the reason, the reason why I'm doing this. Why am I really doing this? And it isn't to be in a meeting, even with friends and Sangha members, lovely though that can be. That wasn't why I began this journey. As a kid, I think I was sort of existentially challenged. I can vaguely remember that even, I don't know, in junior school, in primary school. I recently, or a few years ago, when I was clearing out my mum's house after her death, she kept a school project of mine, as parents do. And I don't know how old I was, but I was 9 or 10 probably. And it was, what is life? was the title of the project. You could do it on anything, like whatever it is. And there were these poems and little reflections about the various stages of life, beginning with birth, ending with death, and actually questioning whether death was the end and whether we came back. And there was in the middle, there was childhood and adolescence and middle age, and then old age. And I looked and I sort of said, well, birth is painful, and as a young child, you can never do what you want. Your parents are always restricting you. And as an adolescent, as a youth, you're caught between, again, you're restricted and you're caught between adulthood and the freedoms, etc. And then you have to work, etc. Anyway, my 9-year-old imagination had gone into the future, and I've drawn a little bar chart of the ages of somebody that lived till 100, and a sort of blue bar was for the unhappy times in that decade, and the red bar was for the happy times, and then I added up all the numbers, and concluded that there were more unhappy times than happy times if you live to 100, and why would you bother? And at the end of this project, I just got a little tick from this picture. These days, I think I might have called in some health professionals to have a look at me. Anyway, I'm pleased that I had that sort of questioning mind, and a lot of kids, I suspect, do. And we, at some point, often lose it, don't we? Some point, we somehow settle down into building the life that we think we should be having, drawn from what other people around us are doing, normally, what our friends are doing, and so forth. And we forget about this sort of questioning of why we're here and what we're going to do in the face of death, which could come at any moment. What are we going to do, as Gandalf said, with the time that we've got? And I think part of the challenge is to keep that quest, at the forefront of our Dharma lives. I think particularly if you're ordained, or particularly if you've asked for ordination, hopefully it's that quest that has got you to that point. That sort of questioning that's got you to that point. Sometimes I've met people who have sort of been attracted to Triratna, maybe even asked for ordination, but they have been more drawn by the friendly Sangha community, and or maybe, I don't know, wanting to have some sort of approval, some sense of belonging, the love that you can get from belonging to a group. There is a strong kind of tendency in us. And to those people, I want to say, well, look harder, look deeper, and don't embark on a journey to ordination until you've experienced something of this questioning of what life is about, because Buddhism isn't going to be, I don't know, just an add-on that makes us a little bit more comfortable in an otherwise very worldly, conventional life. On the other hand, if somebody comes along and they have got this questioning, then I'd really say, well, really take that seriously. And in a way, that's why I asked for ordination, and that's why I was ordained, as it were, and that's what I need to keep in mind now that I am ordained. And in a way, when you're ordained, one of the vows you take, they're called acceptance verses, but they're like ordination vows, and one of them is for the attainment of enlightenment. I accept this ordination. And I think that's very easy to forget. The Buddha said that we could become enlightened. We could experience what the Buddha experienced on that night of the full moon of Wesak of May. Perhaps it wasn't May, but anyway, 2,500 years ago or so. That's what is we're trying to do. That's what the continuity needs to be. And I think even as Buddhists, it's like, well, I find anyway, I live in London, and even though I live in a Buddhist community and work in the Sangha, my inner life isn't always, despite what Ketaraja said, isn't always directed towards the three jewels. I recently came back from a 2-month retreat, and it was a wonderful experience being a retreatant on a meditation retreat that Vasandra was leading for 2 months in South Wales. And I think I went deeper in my own Dharma, my understanding of the Dharma than I'd ever done before. And it was, I felt incredibly grateful to all the people that have helped me to this point, grateful to Vasandra, grateful to all my teachers, particularly grateful to Bhante, and of course grateful to the Buddha. And you know, a few days later, I found myself on my iPad, iPad Air, looking for a new iPad. A new iPad Air, and seeing, oh, had one come out. And one has now come out, the iPad Air 2024, comes in 2 screen sizes, 11-inch and 13-inch. And I haven't succumbed yet, but that is also part of my mind. This grasping, craving, wanting thing, which somewhere I must believe will fulfill me. Somewhere I believe that it will. And everything around us, so much in our culture, is telling us that that is the real way to happiness and fulfillment. On this retreat, you know, I was frequently at the tea bar, of course, and you know, this selection of teas, and there was this box of PG tips, and you know, you can't help but reading boxes, can you, when you're on a silent retreat? We were silent for 6 months, 6 weeks, sorry. And on this PG tips packet, it said a whole new perspective in every sip. A whole in every sip. And there we were, being instructed into how to look into the nature of mind and completely have a different vision of what it is to be conscious and aware. And PG tips were offering that in every sip. So there's a real sense in which the world is very much telling us that you don't have to quest, you don't have to do anything. You just have a cup of tea and look at your iPad and buy another iPad, and you'll be fine. I want to read you something that you may have heard me read before. It's from David Foster Wallace, and it's just such a wonderful passage. I'll read a little bit of it, and then I'll come back to it maybe later in the talk, if there's time. David Foster Wallace was an American writer. He died tragically young, took his own life, suffered from depression. This is from a speech that he was giving to some students graduating. I don't know the college, but they call it a commencement speech. You know, they're commencing their adult life. He says, because here's something else that's true. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshipping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And an outstanding reason for choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship, be it Christ or Allah or Yahweh or the Wiccan Mother Goddess or the Four Noble Truths, or some infrangible set of ethical principles, is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, If they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough, never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally plant you. On one level, we all know this stuff already. It's been codified as myths and proverbs, cliches, bromides, epigrams, parables, the skeleton of every great story. The trick is keeping the truth up front in daily consciousness. Worship power, you will feel weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over others to keep the fear at bay. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out, and so on. I'll pause there he goes on, but I want to just, in a way, stop there for now. He puts it very clearly that our world, our culture doesn't, everybody worships, but we don't know what to worship. The Buddha to be, before he embarked on, well, before he went forth, in the Pariyesana Sutta, he says, Bhikkhus, before my enlightenment, while I was still only an unenlightened bodhisattva, I too, being myself subject to birth, sought what was also subject to birth. Being myself subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow, and defilement, I sought what was also subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow, and defilement. Then I considered thus, why, being myself subject to birth, do I seek what is also subject to birth? Why, being myself subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow, and defilement, do I seek what is also subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow, and defilement? Suppose that being myself subject to birth, having understood the danger in what is subject to birth, I seek the unborn supreme security from bondage, nibbana. And of course, that's what he goes on to do. So that reflection is, I think, very, very current. I mean, it needs to be very current. It's very, very, it's a constant human reflection that we need to keep alive for ourselves. Also, with these words, the first words of the Buddha, repeatedly experience, he says, wandering through many lives, seeking but not finding the builder of this house, repeatedly experiencing the suffering of birth. So in that, repeatedly experiencing the suffering of birth, there's, in a way, the larger view, right view, you could say, about the nature of the human condition, particularly this notion that we are born again and again and again, and we look for fulfillment again and again and again, and we don't find it, and then we repeat that whole cycle. That sort of that's seen as a tragedy, isn't it? In from a dharmic perspective, it's not yippee, I get another go. It's a tragedy of being caught on some sort of hamster wheel or the wheel of life. And this view, not just of rebirth. Now, you don't have to, of course, Bhante was very clear that you didn't have to believe in rebirth in order to practice the Dharma. You could go for refuge to the three jewels without believing in rebirth, because Buddhism doesn't ask you to have any blind faith in anything that you can't yet experience or don't know. And I think that's very, very key. And particularly towards the end of his life, Bhante really stressed that rebirth was definitely part of Buddhism. It wasn't an add-on. Some scholars have sometimes proposed that the Buddha didn't really teach rebirth, that it was just part of the culture that the Buddha was living in, and therefore that was part of what he used. And Bante's very clear that no, Buddhism teaches rebirth. Buddhism teaches that we have life after life. We've done this before, and we will probably be doing it again, unless in this life, or at the point of death, or in the bardo, we gain liberation. We see the truth. Now, that isn't the cultural view that we normally live in the West. We normally live in a much more narrow view that this life is the only life, and that with the ending of the death of the body, that is the ending of consciousness. That's the end of everything. And we often hold that view, perhaps not very consciously, and practice the Dharma, not having looked at that view. In which case, the Dharma does, well, I don't know what it does, but enlightenment then changes it. I mean, enlightenment would mean something very different if at the end of this body, you die anyway and everything's gone. Because actually, I don't think I'd bother. I'm in my late 50s now, and I've got a comfortable life, and I don't know how long I've got, but why kind of bother if I'm comfortable enough anyway? Why not just go for the iPad Air 2024, 13-inch? If there's not some sort of questing beyond death, yeah. For me, when my dad died, I was quite young when he died, and I had a very tangible sense of a presence, his presence, after the death of his body. I would communicate with him and had some experience of that, of him, and I was convinced that consciousness, something of consciousness carried on. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what that means. Buddhism says, look, consciousness isn't a thing. It's not a static, it's not an entity. It's not something you can, as it were, call a thing in a world of things. But perhaps it's more like a stream of processes, of events, and something of that stream carries on after the death of the body. I'm really pleased that, I don't know, in sort of Western culture, this notion of rebirth is entering through some surprising quarters. Even scientists and psychiatrists and medics are starting to open up to the notion that death might not be the end. Partly, some of them have been stimulated into that by people having near-death experiences, as they're called. In the last number of years, more and more evidence has come to light from people who have, as it were, died and then been revived. And that's, of course, due to medical science, that they can be revived. 100 years ago, they would have just died and not been able to be revived. There's more and more evidence, but that's another talk. What I want to sort of say, though, is that if we do have that nihilistic, well, you could say sort of humanist perspective that this life is all there is, then Buddhism, I think, takes on a different meaning. It somehow diminishes, I think, the whole noble quest into, at its worst, or at its most trivial, a sort of series of life hacks that you meditate here, you go on retreat, you feel a bit better, you carry on with your normal life. On YouTube, you can look at lots of life hacks, like you're meant to, I don't know, wake up early and then go straight out into daylight, into the sunshine, and that will trigger dopamine and you'll have a better day and so forth. I've never tried that one. I don't like getting up in the morning. But you know what I mean? It's reduced to that level of how to just optimize this life. And we are obsessed, our culture is obsessed, I think, with optimizing our life, living the best life, living my best life. And it's trivial compared to the noble quest that the Buddha embarked on, and the realization that he gained. So, of course, as we've heard, as those of you who are here, Kate Arata was talking about the going forth and leaving the palace. Going forth is intrinsic to that quest. It's not really an option. There is a leaving behind of the worldly in order to pursue something beyond conditioned existence. There has to be. What that looks like for each person is different. What that looks like for each person is individual. It doesn't necessarily mean for everybody leaving your family and becoming a celibate nun or non-core. It doesn't need to mean that. Bhante has been very, very well. One of the I think the geniuses of his vision in Triratna is that lifestyle is secondary to this existential quest and to going for refuge to the three jewels. My sister has just recently got ordained. I'm sort of delighted. She's called Bodhi Vandana. She was ordained last October, last autumn. And she only met Bhante once. And one of the things that he said to her, I don't think she'd asked about this, but one of the things he said to her is that going forth for you will look very different to how it has looked for Jnanavaca. And he was very sensitive to the fact that she was married, she's got two grown-up kids who have now got kids of their own, so she's a grandmother twice. She's she had a career, she's retired now, but she had a career as a teacher. I've sort of, I live in a Buddhist community, I gave up on career, I'm not married, I don't have any dependents. It's a very different life that I'm living, and yet we're part now, I'm delighted to say, of the same order, going for refuge to the three jewels. It can look different. And I've seen her quest towards ordination, and I know that it's involved a great deal of going forth, but it's not been necessarily so external. She's had to shift her priorities in life, and that has affected not just her, but her immediate family, and they haven't always liked how it's affected them. But there you go, she's managed to do it and bring them on board with her. Because in the end, I think they've seen that she's growing, then it does everybody good. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that it's different for different people, and it's not an option. It's not an option. And I think it's not just not an option, it's a continuous process. The Buddha, in the sort of archetypal life story of the Buddha and the Buddha to be, he just leaves the palace once, doesn't he? He leaves the home of his father once, and then he's in the forest, he's in the jungle, the Indian jungle, and practicing, and that is the going forth. And for us, I think it's going to be more subtle and more continuous process. For me, I still have to wrestle with going forth from the worldly, the draw of the worldly things towards reality. So the house builder, the construction of the house, that the Buddha says he will never build the house again. The house, of course, is this mind, this body, this identity that I have, that you have probably got, unless you've seen through it. There is an identification with our mind-body, our body-mind. And it's that house of the mind and body that that identification with it, that at death, the death of the body, it's said that clinging to mind and body will, and identifying it, will still be part of this stream of consciousness. And that's what will propel that stream into finding another form, into building another house, building another body around itself. and taking birth again. As soon as we have a mind and body and we identify with it, we also create a world. It's not just that the house is the mind and body, it's also the world that that mind body experiences. We assume, don't we, that the world is an objective matter, that it's out there completely as it appears to be to us, and we have just, as it were, found ourselves in it. Like walking into a room that was already there, we've just now, we are in this world. But actually the world is an experience. It's an experience through the five senses, the physical senses, and through the sixth sense of the mind. And that experience is partly, in part, conditioned by the sorts of bodies we have, the sorts of senses we have, the sorts of minds we have, the sorts of consciousness that we have. If we were a different sort of animal, if we were a fly in this room or mosquito, we would be experiencing a different world. Our sense perceptions would be different, and the world would be different that we experience. So the world, at least the experienced world, and after all, that is all that we know. We don't know what's really there behind experience. This experienced world is not completely separate from the mind and body that's having the experience. Does that make sense? It's a co-arising. We have mind and body and world. That's quite an important reflection, because when we take the world to be real, that reinforces this sense of identification with this body as being who I am, this mind as being who I am, and vice versa. They support each other. So it's quite good to, from time to time, reflect on the nature of the perceptual situation. I know that sounds sort of grandiose, but it's really good, I think, from time to time, recognize that our experience is our experience. It's not the experience of all beings. Yeah, simply like if somebody was colorblind, they would have a different experience of the world. If you had a different sense, if you could see more of the electromagnetic spectrum, if you could see ultraviolet light or infrared light, you would have a different experience of the world. We don't actually experience the world as it is. We don't know what it is. We can only experience what we can experience through this mind and body. And we take that to be real. But if our consciousness could really see the relative nature of this experience, it might be able to free itself from identifying so closely with it. It might be able to. I think that's a hint as to what the Buddha might have experienced under the Bodhi tree. He stopped identifying with this mind and body and with the world that mind and body experience. That's what conditioned existence is. He stopped identifying with it. He says that he reached the end of every kind of craving, every kind of craving. I've talked about craving for things a little bit anyway, and this identification with body and mind. That's related to Kamachanda. Kamachanda is the craving for sense experience, And we all know what that's like. We crave satisfaction, pleasure through our senses. I guess including the mind sense, not just the physical sense. That's Kamachanda. But the Buddha not only had ended Kamachanda, he'd also ended Bhavachanda, which is the craving, the clinging to an identity, to being, to wanting to be someone, to having an identification with, this mind-body, wanting to be something or someone, an identification with existence, wanting to exist. That's Bhavachanda, wanting to become someone. That goes very, very deep. I mean, Kamachanda goes pretty deep, at least in me. But Bhavachanda seems to be sort of about who I am or who I think I am. And I think, again, our culture doesn't really support, well, it won't support overcoming any of these cravings. But Bhavachanda, I am sort of struck by, in our, particularly in Western individualistic culture, how much our culture tends to say, look, develop an identity of who you are and stand up and be yourself, be your true self. I am this, I am that, I'm not this, I'm not that. Now, there's a healthy sense to that. Bhante had said, look, we do need to become a healthy kind of individual, have a healthy sense of self before we see through the whole constructed nature of self. That is important, but it can't be an end point to develop an identity, be that around gender or race or sexual orientation or this body or possessions or status or career or whatever it is that gives us a sense of identity. That can't be an end in itself, discovering who you are and then being content with that. And I think even the process of trying to develop an identity can be so painful. You know, in the community that I live with, there are, you know, some younger guys, younger men, and they're subject to social media and the pressures of social media in a way that I wasn't when I was growing up. And there's such a pressure to not only have the right identity, but to really promote that in the world and say, this is me, I look like this, I act like this, I behave like this is me. And I think that that creates a lot of pain. Somebody trying to prop up their identity and shore themselves up and then promote it. Causes a lot of pain. So Bhavachanda is renouncing, seeing through in a way the constructed nature of all identities and renouncing that. The Buddha would not have identified with anything in conditioned existence at all. That's Bhavachanda. And then, of course, there's Vibhavachanda. Vibhavachanda is the craving for non-existence. So you know, I've never had sort of chronic depression or anything that has led me to not to want to be alive. But goodness, every morning I experience the pull of the duvet that is like, I don't want to be conscious. I don't want to be conscious. I don't want to actually be aware at all. And it's nice and cozy here. That's Vibhavachanda in a perhaps a milder but quite an insidious form that I battle with, or not. So you've got this overcoming of all craving, the end of all types of craving, Kamachanda, Bhavachanda, Vibhavachanda. So in a way, that's what real going forth looks like. Yeah? That's a real going forth. That's the kind of, it's not just chocolate or carrot cake or something. It can't be just that, or being a good Buddhist even. It's more than that, much, much more than that. And of course, that requires us to dedicate our lives to something beyond conditioned existence. The three jewels, as they the symbols that represent something beyond conditioned existence. Particularly, that's what we do at ordination. We dedicate our lives to that. And that means following a path. It's not that you just dedicate your life once and then you're done. It means following constantly, ideally, this path of moving towards a transcendental reality, moving to something beyond the world of conditioned existence. It's the other side of going forth, dedicating your life. And I want to say that again and again, because I think Buddhism is becoming fashionable in Western culture. And you only have to look on YouTube, and there are plenty of teachers, whether they call themselves Buddhist or not, drawing from the Buddhist tradition, but doing it in a way that is decontextualized from the whole of the tradition. And mostly they give you life hacks. Even they promise you awakening, enlightenment, without any reference to needing to change your life or follow some sort of path. There's this growing trend of teachers teaching non-duality, sometimes drawing from Buddhism, sometimes drawing from Advaita Vedanta Hinduism, sometimes not really being clear what they're drawing from. But from a Buddhist perspective, you don't just wake up, and even if you did, that's not the end. You have to transform your whole life. It's a life transformation. Does that make sense? Even if you have seen the true nature of reality, unless it's transformed every aspect of your being, your every thought, your every word, and every deed, you're not there yet. You're not fully enlightened. You may be on the path, but there is a path. The Buddha didn't just watch a YouTube video. Do you know what I mean? It was a complete transformation. I'm going to read you David Foster Wallace again, not because he's talking about the transcendental, but he's hinting at it actually. But he is talking about how there's a path. So remember, he was talking about different forms of worship and how they eat you up. Well, he goes on to say, look, the insidious thing about these forms of worship is not that they're evil or sinful. It is that they are unconscious. They are default settings. They're the kind of worship you gradually slip into day after day, and getting more and more selective about what you see and how you measure value without ever being fully aware that that's what you're doing. And the world will not discourage you from operating on your default settings, because the world of men and money and power hums along quite nicely on the fuel of fear and contempt and frustration and craving and the worship of self. Our present culture has harnessed these forces in ways that have yielded extraordinarily wealth and comfort and personal freedom. The freedom to be lords of our own tiny skull-sized kingdoms, alone at the center of all creation. This kind of freedom, well, it has much to recommend it, but of course, there are other kinds of freedom, different kinds of freedom. And the kind that is most precious, you will not hear much talked about in the great outside world of winning and achieving and displaying. The really important kind of freedom involves attention and awareness and discipline and effort, and being able truly to care about other people and to sacrifice for them over and over in myriad petty, little, unsexy ways every day. That is real freedom. The alternative is unconsciousness, the default setting, the rat race, the constant gnawing sense of having had and lost some infinite thing. Isn't that fantastic? Isn't that so beautiful and powerful and eloquent? And he, I think, gave that speech a few decades ago, and it feels even more urgent, I think, now. But the Buddha didn't just, the freedom that the Buddha attained was more than even what David Foster Wallace is sort of talking about. He really did see some new way of experiencing everything beyond dualistic perception, beyond self-clinging. As soon as I identify with this mind and body, everything else that I experience is other than me, because I'm this, and everything else, you and this room, this world, are other than me, different to me, separate to me. There's this fundamental dualism in the unenlightened mind of self and world, self and other. And the me bit is, as it were, in here, in the body, in the mind. And it's never very, we probably don't look very carefully to say, where is that me? Buddhism encourages you to do that, to see that actually it's a construct. When you see it's a construct, and when you see that this world that we experience is actually also a mind-made construct, then there might be a glimpse, at least, of this real freedom. It's a different way of perceiving. Not that the Buddha didn't have a sense perception like we do. The Buddha would have still been able to see colors and shapes just like we do, and have a mind that could think and talk if he wanted to. It's just that he wouldn't have interpreted his sense experience as ultimately real. He would have seen that it was all a construct. He would have known that it was all a construct, and he would have therefore been in touch with a larger dimension of mind, of being, that seems to open up, apparently, when you let go of identifying with this limited self and this experienced world. A consciousness opens up that is doesn't have this split of me in here and world out there. It's a consciousness that includes everything. I mean, it is everything. Everything. It's like we're in it. It's not in us anymore. And everything is in it. And there's no ultimate separation between you and me and anything else. And the effect of that is said to be unbounded love, freedom, fearlessness, unbounded love. If you're not identified with this very body or anything else in conditioned existence, there's nothing you can lose. And you're in touch with something far more fulfilling. It's freedom, but it's also infinite peace, and it's bliss, and it's beauty, and it's love, and it's fearlessness, and it's creativity and energy that is unleashed, as it were, through you, not yours so much as you become a vehicle for something beyond self and beyond world. And that is how things really are. It's not just like the Buddha or an enlightened being had this kind of peak experience and that's great. It's also the truth. It's also how things really are. And it's us unenlightened ones that have got it very wrong, that have got a misinterpretation of reality, of experience. And that misinterpretation keeps us bounded in our tiny skull-sized kingdoms. And the freedom that we then seek often is, as it were, just about decorating that tiny skull-sized kingdom with more and more fancy electronic gadgets, in my case. Yeah, that is not real freedom. It's complete delusion. And the more that I grasp for satisfaction within that delusion, the more I sort of tighten the prison around me. So the significance of the, Raja touched on this, the significance of the Buddha's enlightenment wasn't just for him. Of course, it's got significance down history and for humanity, and we wouldn't be here unless the consequences of that enlightenment experience had reverberated down the generations. But it's what I'm trying to point to is that it's got cosmic significance. It's not even just historical significance in time and space. It's somehow got significance for reality itself, whatever reality is. And perhaps here, I can't really, anything that I say is sort of wrong, uh, um, uh, because you can't really talk about something beyond time and space. So words are, after all, metaphors, and this is perhaps more metaphorical than anything I've said so far. But it's as if when the Buddha gained enlightenment, reality knew itself for the first time. It, as it were, became aware of itself in human form, in a human body. It became aware of itself. The Buddha had, while he still had a human body, he still had the same sort of body that you and I have, with the same senses, but his mind wasn't identified with any of that. His mind was, as it were, one with this unconditioned realm of reality itself that somehow is everything, is infinite, and yet expressed, known through a human finite form. That was said, it's said that that is the first time that that happened. And then since then, it's as if enlightenment is now more possible. It's like the cosmos. We live now in a universe where enlightenment has happened, and therefore it's more possible for us. I think, I mean, enlightenment must be the Buddha said it was the highest kind of achievement that a human being can attain. But for a Buddha to have done it on his own, discovered enlightenment for the first time, must be an even higher achievement for us. We now have the Dharma, the teaching of the Buddha, but more than that, it's like there's the enlightened mind in the universe that can help draw us towards enlightenment. We can worship the Buddha, open up to the Buddha. And that doesn't mean just worshipping an image. It means worshipping the enlightened mind that is part of reality itself, opening up to that and allowing that to come through us, surrendering to that, opening to that. So to forget that would be a tragedy. To have come across the Dharma, to have responded to the Buddha, and then to forget that would be, I think, a tragedy. And then to do the whole thing again, because next time round, you or I may not be as fortunate, and we may not come across the Dharma. We may do, but we may not. And this life is said to be such a precious opportunity, because that's what we could achieve in this lifetime, what the Buddha achieved. At least we could have a significant realization that means that we will never lose touch with the Dharma over lifetimes. We become irreversible in the Dharma. And he said that that's very possible for a committed practitioner. And compared to that quest and goal, everything else you can see is trivial. I think it's trivial. And of course, the Buddha didn't, he gained enlightenment at the age of 35, it said, and he spent the next 45 years of his life teaching the Dharma and enabling other people to realize what he had realized. That is his compassionate action. That's his compassionate action. Somewhere the Buddha is still teaching and enabling people to wake up. Why do I say that? Because it's not just that enlightenment, I don't know, it has to be communicated. Part of the Buddha's experience seems to be that it had to be communicated. That's what compassion really means. From a Buddhist perspective, compassion is communicating the Dharma. At its highest, that's what it means. Of course, there are other forms of compassion, helping alleviate suffering in any other form, but the highest is helping people to wake up to what the Buddha had woken up to. That's what he did. It's said, isn't it, that he doubted whether he could actually communicate his experience. It was so sublime, so beyond any words. He doubted whether he could communicate it. And of course, according to the story, you have Brahma Sahampati, this divine being who pleads with the Buddha for him to teach. And what he says is that there are some people who will be able to hear you. There are some people with but little dust on their eyes. They will be able to hear you. And the Buddha sees the vision. He sees humanity as this bed of lotuses, this lake of lotuses. And yes, some of them are clear of the water and open and receptive to his teaching. And he says, open for them are the doors to the deathless. Let those with ears now show their face. Open for them are the doors to the deathless. That means us. Open for us are the doors to the deathless. It's up to us as to whether we walk through those doors. Bhante has made, I think, Bhante Sangharakshita has made the teaching of the Buddha more accessible, more clear to us than any other Buddhist teacher that I know of. Without him, I don't know if I would have been able to practice the Dharma. He's made it incredibly clear. He's, as it were, pointing to those doors of the deathless in an unmistakable fashion, in a way that really works. And it's up to us as to whether we walk towards those doors and ultimately through them. So I'll leave it there. Let me just finish with those words of the Buddha, those first words of the Buddha again. Wandering through many lives, seeking but not finding the builder of this house, repeatedly experiencing the suffering of birth. House builder, you have been seen. You will build no house again. All your rafters are broken. Your ridgepole is demolished too. The mind has gone to the unconditioned and reached the end of every kind of craving.